Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us for today's live online webinar and book launch, Curating Your Photographs for Creative Expression with William Neill, author and photographer behind our newly released publication, The Photographer's Portfolio Development Workshop. We're going to be getting started in just a minute to give participants some time to enter. In the meantime, please feel free to share with us in the chat your name and where you're tuning in from. Welcome everyone. If you've just joined us and you're here for our live online webinar, Curating Your Photographs for Creative Expression with William Neill, you've come to the right place. We will be getting started in just a minute. While we wait for attendees to join, please feel free to share with us where you're tuning in from. All right, we may have some more participants who will be joining us in progress, but we're going to get started now. A couple of things to note. If you have to leave early for whatever reason, we will be emailing all those who registered the recording to this webinar to watch its replay. If you have any questions during the tutorial at any time, please enter those into the Q&A function on your toolbar. We will be moderating questions with William at the end. Now to introduce myself as your host, my name is Katie Walker and I'm the marketing coordinator at Nook. It is my pleasure to welcome you to this book launch and webinar. Today we have more than 150 people registered for this event. So for those of you who are newer to Nook, we are a smaller independent publisher local to the Bay Area and founded in 2006 with the goal of helping all level photographers improve their skills to capture those moments that matter. Recently, we have taken our passion for creativity and of making finely crafted books and started applying it to other artistic endeavors, namely publishing books on drawing, painting, graphic design, crafts, and much more. We are delighted to welcome William Neill as we promote and celebrate his new book, The Photographer's Portfolio Development Workshop, which I will be sharing links to purchase in the chat with a discount that you can use at checkout at rockynook.com. We ask that if you buy William's book, that you leave him a review online, as this helps both us, the publisher, but also helps William as the photographer, author, and instructor. William Neill, a resident of Yosemite since 1977, is an award-winning nature photographer, widely published in books, magazines, calendars, and posters. His limited edition prints have been collected and exhibited in museums and galleries nationally. He served as photographer at the Ansel Adams Gallery for 5 years and received the Sierra Club's Ansel Adams Award for Conservation Photography. Feature articles about his work have appeared in Life, Outdoor Photography, and Communication Arts. His corporate clients have included Sony Japan, Canon USA, Nike, and Nikon. He is the photographic author of 13 books, including Yosemite, The Promise of Wildness, Landscapes of the Spirit, William Neill, Photographer, a Retrospective, Light on the Landscape, and most recently, The Photographer's Portfolio Development Workshop. Please join me in welcoming William Neill.
Before we get started, I want to thank Nook for putting this all together, the books and this session today. Especially like to thank Scott, Ted, Jocelyn, and Katie for their excellent help in pulling it all together. The title of my presentation is Curating Your Photographs for Creative Expression. First, I'd like to give a little background. Some of you know my background a bit, but those of you who don't, I started photographing in the 70s with my first camera. My college degree is environmental conservation, which influences what I photograph quite a bit. And I've been a resident of Yosemite for the past 45 years. I was fortunate to become the photographer and curator at the Ansel Adams Gallery from 1980 to 1984. And here you see a photograph of Ansel and myself in about 1981 at a reception behind the Ansel Adams Gallery. And I've fortunately been fortunate enough to have been a represented artist at Ansel's Gallery since 1983. And Ansel approved that representation when seeing a portfolio of my work. I've been self-employed since 1984, and that seems like an awful long time to me about now. And I've been the photographic author of 13 books. I'd like to just give you a little publishing history. The first book I came out with was The Sense of Wonder. I was illustrating the words of the great nature writer Rachel Carson. And then finally, Light on the Landscapes with Rocky Nook, and the new book we're talking about today. For my presentation today, I will be sharing my ideas on how photographers can better develop their editing skills to communicate their creative point of view. Thematic portfolios give you a way to focus your efforts and for your viewers to better see through your eyes. By curating a portfolio, I mean selecting photographs, gathering them together, organizing them into a theme. I'm using the term editing for this selection process, not specifically about processing digital files, just to make that clear. I'll be showing you some examples of my editing in a Death Valley portfolio yet to be complete, and for a new book called Yosemite Sanctuary in Stone, using mostly intimate scenes taken over the last 45 years. But first, I want to go over some key points. As I mentioned earlier, I believe you can become a better photographer by learning how to edit, learning how to focus your images into thematic portfolios. I taught an online course called Portfolio Development for 8 years, and this book is generated from those lessons. And I consistently saw photographers elevate the organization and presentation of their work and gain confidence in themselves as artists. By showing you the very best images presented in the tightly focused theme, your work can communicate with your audience more powerfully. Just to go over some of the basic process and how I like to help people get started. The concept is finding your focus. What do you really want to say? What do you have to say? How do you want to say it? First thing I consider, I suggest you consider is what really inspires you. What do you love? Where do you love to be? The subject can be broad or narrow, such as forests in general, or focused on maple trees or maybe aspen trees for a narrow type of focus. Your portfolio could be broad, like just Death Valley, or more specific, like the dunes of Death Valley. But the important thing is to focus on a theme, and one that you feel passionately about, and curate your images and then make new work with that theme in mind. Here are some sample Lightroom screenshots to illustrate my basic approach using a selection of Death Valley photographs. The first step is to gather potential images. So I dive into my catalog, I search my library folders, often by ratings or keywords. And then my initial grouping here includes many candidates. And I grouped them in subsets. So I start wide and then I start narrowing down. So the selections you can see over here is an initial subset of 4x5 images taken many years ago, actually. They're kind of the core, in my mind, of a Death Valley portfolio. So I wanted to start with them and decide which ones might be in that portfolio. So I'm trying to show you how to visualize groups or subsets to help narrow down from a broad selection to a tighter selection. So in Lightroom, I'll take a selection like this, select the group, and then go into the survey mode, which is down here, and come up with a tighter selection. I've used the tab key to move the panels out of the way. And now I can see a broader selection of images, see them more clearly and more simply, and decide which ones I might include and which ones I might not. And as I was editing, I found that I had done more than I'd realized, a lot of black and white photographs in Death Valley. And there's a selection here of a group of images that I generally felt were more dark and more dramatic. And so I selected them, went into the survey mode. And now in the survey mode, I can see more clearly what I have, what I might want to include or not include. Similar, maybe a couple of these dunes like this one and this one are too similar. I'd be popping that out of there, crossing that out. And I'll show you how I do that in the Yosemite grouping in a minute. So here's a group of high key images that I also discovered I'd spent more time than I'd realized on in the past, and now I want to see how they might fit into the portfolio. So once I see them on the screen, like we have here, I have two photographs, for example, of Zabriskie Point. And I think they're too similar to include in the portfolio, so I would pick one and then knock the other one out. I also have two dune photographs that are taken at the same time, different compositions, and I prefer the vertical, so I would take the horizontal out. And this working in subsets helps me narrow down to a tighter edit for when I get to the final selections. Excuse me a sec. Here's a group of images that I took in January in Death Valley. Now, I showed you the work on the previous screenshots were many years ago. So I haven't done any new work in Death Valley, so my trip in January was a great opportunity to add new images. So here's what I came up with. These were my favorites. I selected these by rating. Let's see that most of them are 5 stars. And you know, I realize that I have 2 mud crack images. I don't need both of those. I have several dune photographs that are somewhat similar, so I'd probably narrow those down. I have 2 images with different croppings shown here. And I'll be crossing those out as I go along. But once I see them on the screen like this, I can make some pretty easy edits. So I narrowed it down to a selection like this. So these are the images that I would be taking, excuse me, into the final selection group, and then seeing how they blend in with the past work. So it's a process of looking at past work, making new photographs, and then incorporating those images. Now I'm going to jump into Lightroom. Hopefully I can do this smoothly. Bear with me 1 second while I switch to Lightroom. Okay, hopefully all of you can see my Lightroom catalog. Katie, let me know if you can't see it. What I have here is my collections panel on the left side. Just to give you an overview, this is my actual catalog. You can see I have 315,000 images. So the volume of images that I've taken over the decades makes it that much more helpful to have ways of organizing large amounts of work. So I'll give you a quick overview of how I use collections, and then come back to the Yosemite work. But this is a vast spread of images of projects for websites, for books, for various clients. I even have a section where each year I set up a smart collection. So slowly, as I make images in 2022, I start adding up the best images of that group that I can look at the end of the year. So it's an extensive, kind of messy setup I have here, but I'm focused on the Yosemite project now, so I really don't look elsewhere very much. So to show you how I make a collection set, as you can see here, Yosemite Sanctuary Collection Set, I do that by using the plus button and create collection set. You name it whatever your portfolio might be named. And then once you make that set, you can make collections that fit within that folder. So just to give you an idea, and this isn't necessarily super efficient, but I've tried, I've worked in some subsets, which I'll show you, but my overall selection started of the ready to edit down group was 302 images. Just to flip through them a little bit, there's some similar images. There's black and white versus color, where I'm deciding. Some images even have different rapid patterns behind the leaves. And I'm still when I did this set, when this group, I was still deciding on which ones to include. So this is my broad set of Yosemite images. In order to get to my goal, which is here, my selects collection, which is now down to 109, which is where I want to be for this book project, right around there. I did some subset editing, as I mentioned earlier. Here's a subset of Yosemite waterfalls. So I put favorite images into a group, into this collection. And in order to pare them down, I'll take a Command All, a Select All, to get all the images selected. Then I'll go down here to the Survey tool and group them together. And then I take the Tab key and get them out of my vision. And now I'm set up to make a tighter edit of this waterfall group for the final project. So for example, here I have the 2 photographs of the same waterfall, and I prefer the horizontal. I can take the lower right corner and just take it out of the mix. Here I have another 2 waterfall photographs of the same falls. I like the vertical more than the horizontal. I start to narrow the group down. I have 2 Fern Spring images. I like this one better, so I'm taking this one out. I have an image here that I'm just not in love with anymore, so I'm kicking that out of there. Same thing with this rapids here. And I start to see things that might work as page spreads. 2 high key water images, details of rapids. And moving on down to the second row here, I have a horsetail fall image and another horsetail fall image here. And I prefer this one, so I'm going to knock that out. This photograph is a place I've photographed quite a bit and take my clients, but I have a better one. And so, and I have a better one that's in color, and I'll knock that out. Now I'm getting tighter and tighter. I started at 19, I'm down to 12. You can see down here. This last group here are all bridal veil images. Well, certainly I'm not going to have them all in the book. So I have to make some hard decisions. Which ones are my favorites? Well, I'll put these two next to each other. Same tree, same composition. I like them both, so I had trouble deciding, but I'm going to take this one out. I just like the pattern of the spray in this one. These two really I've always liked, but they're not holding up to some newer images. Sometimes I'll put images that might be similar next to each other. And once I see them in comparison, I go out of there. This one is fairly old, and I think I like my new ones better, so I kick that one out of there as well. So I went from 19 images down to 9. I like this as a foundation for building the book, and they may not all survive into the book, but I would take these images, these 9 images, and drop them into my selects folder. And back to another subset. I have a group of images outside Yosemite. There it is. And as I was editing, I decided I wanted to include areas that were important to me, just as places I love to go and are really not, obviously they're not in the park, but mean a lot to me. And it's really a book about my personal relationship with the area. I have photographs from the Eastern Sierra Slope, Mono Lake, and then I lived in the Merced River Canyon in El Portal for 20 years, so I have photographs from the canyon, as I call it. As far as the editing process, as I was illustrating in the waterfalls, I can do that same thing with the aspen. I have grouped them together. I go ahead and take them into survey mode, which is here, and I use the N key. I use keyboard commands a lot. As you can see, if you hover over the tool, you can see what key to hit. And then I use the tab key to get the panels out of the way. Now I have a good, clean, clear way to see the images and decide what to keep and what not to keep. Now the book is going to have more intimate landscapes and broad scenes. As much as I like this scenic, I'm going to take it out. Now I realize I have 4 fall images. And that's maybe, you know, the favorite season for most people over there. I don't have many winter images over there, for this is a keeper for sure. And I find this image kind of an often used composition, aiming up into fall colors like that. And I think I'm going to take that one out. So now I have these 4 images to decide upon and probably put into the final edit. In fact, they're already in there. So back to the overall group outside Yosemite, I would go through the same process with Mono Lake images. This is very close to the park border. This is Devil's Post Pile, but it's surprisingly close to the border of the park, and I decided to include it. Anyway, now I want to get back to the general overview. As I go through these subsets, I start dropping them into my selects folder. So the way I do that is, first of all, you make the folder. create collection, and that's what I did to make the selects folder. And then I can either drag images from my group of 300 into the selects collection, or I can also use the target mode, where if you control click, you can see it is set as a target, and that's why the plus sign is there. So as I go through a broader group, I can hit the, not sure the correct name, add, there it is, add photo to target collection. So I can go through these images and just click on that button, and it'll add it to the target selection. So that's how I start to narrow down my groupings. And now I'll just give you a quick overview of the final selection. I have not made final sequencing yet, but I've been using the book module in Lightroom to kind of a pre-design for my book. The final design will go into Adobe InDesign, but this is a quick and easy way to lay out a book. Some of these are in the right sequence, some of them are not, but once I have a group, a whole folder, this folder, the book selection will take everything in that folder and build it into a book, like you can see here. So all the pages are laid out. I've started to do some sequencing, so you'll see some things that work, some that don't. But the way I got this layout, the way I wanted it, and I like white borders, so I set it up that way, is to use the auto layout panel over here, auto layout, and I made a preset. They have some templates, these three up here, but this one is my own, and you do that by edit, auto layout preset. It gives you a whole choice of page options. There's with text, without text, full bleed, all kinds of ways to do it. So once you get that template set up, you come up here and you save those current settings as a preset. And every time you click on the book module, you will have the format. You can also adjust the page individually, and I wanted to put this in as a panoramic. So as you can see over here, there's lots of options. This is just a selection for 2-page spreads, and I picked one with a white border. I'm just a white border kind of guy. So now I'll just show you some of the sequencing and how nice it is to look at a book on a screen. I take the panels out, and Lightroom lays it out to look like a book. So I can start to compare images, how they work together. I've been playing around with this one. I love the contrast comparison of rippled worm-eaten wood on the left and very fast-changing ripples on the right, but they just have a similar feel. I like the color contrast as well. So it's quite a bit of fun, but difficult to lay out a book. So I'm just like maybe halfway through it. You can also choose to leave blank pages. That's easy enough to do. And you can see some of these work, some of these don't. And down here in the full screen module, you can look at the book. You can judge sequence. When you can see this much of the book at once, you can start to see the patterns. And one thing I've done is I decided to group the black and white images in little subsets, so you're not seeing black and white and color on the same page. I just didn't want to do that. So I can call that up. see how images might work together. And I like how black and white images work together and then go through them. I like that arrangement. And then it goes back to color. You know, it transition might be a little jarring, but I think color photographs work better together. And so I've separated them out. Now I'd like to jump to another presentation just to show an earlier version of the sample layout where you can save off a book to come back to. And I'm just going to go to the beginning of this and show you how some of the sequencing worked out, just to give you further ideas of how, you know, Lightroom works for book layouts. You can see how images pair up. I think I like this, but maybe we'll see. We'll see. A little 50-50 on this one. I like these two together. I especially like where there's interesting, like the wood and the ripples, the ice and the tree branches. There's certain swirliness to the oak branches that you can see in the ice. And then one of my styles in photography I call forest tapestry, and that comes across strongly in this pairing. Then sometimes I just want to feature an image and put it on a page on the right side by itself. Now, this is a pairing that I really like. I'm not sure I can easily reverse these. I haven't decided whether I want which one I want on which side, so I can just flip them like that. Okay, I think there's one other pairing I wanted to show you. See if I can find it real quick here. Oh, here it is. And just as you're playing around, you sometimes discover, you know, what I consider a winner. And I really like these two images together. So this is just a demo of how I use collections in Lightroom to, in this case, develop this book project. And I hope this has been helpful. I'm going to switch, hopefully smoothly, back to my presentation. And I hope you're asking questions as I've been going along, and I look forward to answering those. Before I wrap up, I just want to show you how the portfolio development has worked out for me. Over the course of time, I came up with these groups of images: landscapes of the spirit, meditations in monochrome, impressions of light, and then I have a Yosemite ebook you see here, and now I'm working on a paper copy of a new Yosemite book. Normally, portfolios take years to develop. Two of these are based on locations: Yosemite images made over 45 years. And the other location was Antarctica, which was a set made in 5 days. But the light, the weather, and the subjects were so compelling, I felt that they were worthy of a portfolio. So I actually have an ebook of all of these. And just as a way to summarize what I've been talking about and hopefully reinforce it, the first steps is to explore your archive to see potential directions. Once you start making collections like you saw in my Lightroom, then you start to develop theme ideas and you start making a collection set, and then it starts to expand. And so when those ideas come to mind, you make the collection in Lightroom for your theme idea. Then once you pick a theme to develop, you can plan your field sessions. Here I say 1 or 2, but can be hundreds. But those field sessions that are planned can be a little more focused on images you might want to add to your portfolio. And so the process continues. You make new work. You start putting the new work and the old work together and seeing if you can build up the depth and the quality of your portfolio. So here's just a quick illustration of the process. You assess. Establishing a benchmark I didn't exactly talk about, but it means being a very tight editor, not letting lesser quality images into your portfolio. Then making new work, adding the successes, obviously, but probably more importantly, rejecting the lesser images and learning from those images that didn't quite work out. And then the feedback loop continues. What I'd like to do next is to just give a preview for those of you who haven't seen the book. Here are some screenshots of some of the spreads. This is the contents, obviously. What happens in the book is that you get assignments. First, you get the information about what I think is important, and then there's an assignment to help you get into your folder, into your Lightroom folders, and start building your thematic portfolios. The trickiest thing about this book is that you're self-assigning. So you do the assignment and then you have to evaluate it. You can also bring in friends or peers, photographers whose feedback you value, and you can have each assignment judged by someone else as well. There's the rest of the contents. So each lesson has the lesson itself and then an assignment. This is probably a key element to the book, how to use it. I think that this page really will help you get started if you decide to use the book. And one of the things that helps is to just build your lessons into a folder, and then when you take photographs from your archive or from new images, you're putting them into lesson 1 and making a tight edit, and then basically you're submitting it to yourself or to somebody who you might want to critique your work. One of the gold mines that came out of this book was my editor Jocelyn had this great idea of making a worksheet, and it walks you through the process a bit more than each chapter does, and you can make notes, and you can print it out and use it again and again for the other portfolios. That wraps it up. Thank you very much. I want to just quickly let you know the discount code. I'm sure you've seen that. And that for me, the best option is the print and ebook bundle that you can get from Rocky Nook directly. Personally, I really like the PDF better than any kind of Kindle, but that's personal preference. Then I'd like to, for those who haven't seen my previous book, Light on the Landscape is a collection of essays that I wrote over 23 years based on my outdoor photographer column. Then I'm just going to kind of slide over this, but if you go to my webpage, you can find out about these various offerings. And I hope you will join me on social media or sign up for my newsletter, and that we can continue keeping in touch. So that wraps it up. thank you very much. I'll stop sharing now.
And I'm back.
Hi.
Hi, that was excellent. We've had such an engaged audience, and I think we really love seeing you navigate Lightroom. We have a number of questions in the Q&A, and before we answer any of those questions, I just wanted to call out a couple of comments and praise that you received. Trevor says, wow, amazing Lightroom organization. John from Melbourne, Australia, who's up at 4 a.m, says, this is a revelation how survey mode is used. This one feature in Lightroom is one I've never used. Ellen says, so helpful. New Lightroom tasks I've been introduced to.
Good, good.
So a lot of great comments. Some people who have already bought the book and are praising the book, just digging into it. Thank you very much. Let's get started on questions. So I'm just going to go through. This was the order in which we received them. And we do have a good amount of time, so I think we should be able to get through all of these.
Great.
There were a couple of questions as you were in Lightroom about your color coding. So can you explain the color coding process that you use?
Well, I'm sure it looked kind of schizophrenic on the screen, but those color codings are not necessarily attached to the book, that particular book. So they're images that I've used to select for other projects. And I haven't cleared out the color markings, the color codings. So nothing that you saw in that section of my Lightroom was really related to the book project, to the book editing that I was showing. So it's basically leftover editing from, you saw how vast my collections files are. So if I'm sending a selection of images to an art consultant and I'm just getting them from random areas, I'll color code to just help me narrow down the selection. It's no more than that, but it's the rating systems, the picks, the stars, the color coding. Everybody uses it a little bit differently, and I don't have a magical system where I use this code for that situation. It's just a narrowing down editing tool, like ratings. So ratings, I start with 3 stars mostly with my editing, and if they get to 4 or 5 stars, or if they get to Photoshop, they usually get 5 stars, that sort of thing.
Ellen asks, when you are editing, do you initially choose regardless of horizontal and vertical?
Yes. I don't distinguish that much. I know people tend to. My background is in stock photography, and we always had to shoot horizontals and verticals. Say if you're photographing a scene in Yosemite and it's this incredible horizontal image, and then a magazine wants a vertical, and so I would shoot verticals for stock use. So no, but in the book design, I would pay attention to that, but I didn't in this in the layout that you saw. If I saw too many, for example, in the book layout, if I saw like 4 or 5 pages with all horizontals with the same border, I would think that's a bit too repetitive. So I might try to find a combination of images that broke that up. So it might be 2 verticals, it might be a horizontal plus a vertical, where when you're flipping through the book and it's all the same, it can get a bit monotonous. So I like to add some variety. And you could see that what I was trying to show with the panorama, that breaks up the pattern. And then a single image on a 2-page spread that can break up a pattern too. So those are the kinds of things I think about.
Ariel asks, do you ever use a software called Bookwright, Bookwright, or if you just use Lightroom?
I don't. I know about Bookwright, and it's been around a long time, and I never finished a book in it. I played around with it at one point, but once Lightroom got its kind of got its act together, where the book module was really mature in its abilities, I stayed there. But I've also some of the ebooks I laid out were done straight out of InDesign and then saved as a PDF, because I was selling and still do sell the PDFs directly. That's actually something where if you look on my website and find my PDF collection, the 5 book covers I kind of showed on the screen toward the end there, those all showed some various approaches to book design. So not only looking at books, real books in a bookstore, you can see how just from my books how different layouts might work, and using text incorporated, which I haven't incorporated text in the Yosemite book yet. Hope that answers the question.
Kathy asks, how do the subset collections relate to the overall sequence of the book? Do you use them as the basis for the book organization, or do you use something else for the overall sequence of the whole book?
Yeah, something else. So the subsets are kind of a mid editing process for getting down to the selects. So say from the 300 to the 100. So when you skim over your set of images, like the broad selection, like my 300 I showed, then you would start to recognize things that might be similar, that you can't put 20 waterfalls. So or that would be my judgment in the case of this book. So I want to get the top tier together. So no, I don't use it for sequencing.
Okay. Carly has asked, do you do any further editing to make the photos work well together at the collection or book assembly point?
Rarely, but I have. I have a few images that were taken at the same time, and over the years I've just processed them separately, and then I go to make a book and put them, because they were taken at the same time, I felt it was cool to put them on a spread together, and then I could see how divergent my processing was. So I have on occasion reined myself in on and not really tried to match one to another, but just see what processing tangents I've taken, but rarely I don't have to do that. One thing I do in terms of processing whenever I do a book is I'm of the school of always tweaking my images. So it's nice. It's a nice concept to spend a few days or a few weeks on a certain image and then be done with it. But say the retrospective book I did has 151 images in it, and I opened up and improved all of them. Some of them I hadn't processed, hadn't touched in 10, 20 years. Just kind of stunning to say that amount of time, but over that period of time, software evolves, I evolve, my tastes evolve, and so I do try to each time I do a book, and I've been doing this with the Yosemite book. Every one you saw on that page has been opened up and maybe tweaked just a little bit, or sometimes even more dramatically to suit my current tastes.
Renee asks, do you add text to your books beyond the specific info on the image?
Say that again, I'm sorry.
Do you add text to your books beyond the specific information on the image?
Uh, yeah, it varies on which book. So I usually do put a caption on each page, but I actually prefer not to even put a caption on the page. Just it might be a plate number, or it might be just a page number. People get attached to knowing something about where it is. So, oh, that's from Glacier Point, and then it kind of solves an equation in their mind. And I'd rather have people wonder where something's from. I'd rather have somebody looking through my images and not getting engaged in the specifics. Well, that's Yellowstone, so yeah, that's why it looks like that. So I'd rather have that be a process of exploration for the viewer. But I do include captions, and the back of several of my books, I have notes on the cameras used. Sometimes lens, f-stop, aperture, even lens, shutter speed, and aperture.
Mhm.
And then text I tend to mix in. Several of the books have text worked through the book to add just a different, poetic, hopefully, side note to the photographs.
Poetic. We like that. Raphael has a couple of questions. I'm going to read them in tandem. He asks, is there an ideal quantity of images where there are too many to be overwhelming or too few to not cut it as a portfolio?
Yeah, that's a good question. And this is addressed in the book a bit, but it depends on the context, which I talk about in the book, what the book, how you're going to output the portfolio. Is it going to be on your webpage? Is it going to be in a book? So say if I have a book of 100 images, that's a reasonable number for a book. If it's 200 images, maybe that gets pretty tedious leafing through 200 pages. What I'm trying to say is that something like a web portfolio might be a reasonable amount, could be as few as 10 or 15 and up to maybe 30 or 40. But you can kind of sense it yourself if you design your web portfolio and you go through it and think about the viewer looking at it one at a time, and see how long it takes to get through it. If you're putting 60 images in a web portfolio, they probably won't make it to the end, just because of the nature of our attention spans, and mine included. Did that answer the question? That kind of meandered, but
I think Raphael is still here, so he might have follow-up if he needs further clarifying, but he did have another question.
okay.
Was it hard to transition from analog type of image selection, i.e. prints for a book, to the digital realm as to visualizing the worth?
Now you're not talking, I'm not sure I quite understand the question. So I've been asked a lot about just switching from analog to digital in terms of capture, but maybe they meant something different here. You can just read it again, I think.
Was it hard to transition from analog type of image selection for a book to a digital realm as to visualizing their worth?
Oh, yeah, I see what you mean. So the books that were done analog were all done by publishers, and I wasn't doing the editing. So the book designer got to make those decisions. So up until in the 90s, when I had books published, they were all published from film, analog, straight from film to the book, no Photoshop. So that was the hardest part, is just not having that control that now I can have. So it's been wonderful to switch to digital in the sense of being able to use a tool like Lightroom. When working with Rocky Nook, I get to see the book on the screen and make judgments and help out with the book design. So it was an improvement to switch from analog to digital in terms of laying out a book. And some people will make in analog, if you're printing out, making prints to lay out a book, I've never had to do it, but laying a book out, of 8x10 prints, laying it out in the, on a dining room table, still legitimate way to do it.
Kathy asks, how do you decide on the overall organization for a book? Do you use chronological, by content, by design, or something else?
Well, I have to confess, I'm really doing it myself. I'm new at it. So in my Antarctic book, since the time was such a narrow frame of time, I actually laid out the book chronologically. So there are sections of the 5 days. So day 1, a group of images, and all the captions have timestamps. So it kind of shows the rapid collection of images. I took 10,000 images in 5 days. So, but it just made sense to do it chronologically, but that's the only time I've ever done it. So in terms of the other books, there was no chronology involved. So it was just what images worked together, deciding how many, like I'm deciding in the Yosemite book, how many broader scenics to include, just to kind of give a sense of place for Yosemite. It's like I could do a whole book of intimate landscapes and you wouldn't even know where it was for some of them. And they were all in Yosemite. So, I'm thinking of, how I want to show how I see Yosemite differently, but also give a sense of the magnificence of the place.
Speaking of specificity and location, Ellen wants to know where your background is from. She guesses the Pacific Northwest rainforest.
Yeah, this is Olympic National Park. This photograph was taken probably 30 years ago.
By yourself, of course.
By myself, yeah.
We have time for a couple more questions, and we have 3 from Steve. So I think we're going to get through these, and if any more come in the meantime, we can answer those, but we're going to be wrapping up. So Steve asks 3 questions. 1, are you developing your images in Lightroom or an outside software through Edit? 2, can you have different subjects in a portfolio? 3, can you talk about lessons you've learned from your movement picture technique? So number 1, I'll repeat, is, are you developing your images in Lightroom or an outside software?
I'm using Lightroom more and more. Of course, Lightroom didn't exist when I started using Photoshop, so it's slowly shifted. So I use Lightroom generally for, or mostly I've used it for global adjustments. And then until recently, I've used Photoshop for local adjustments, just to make it simple. So the percentage generally has been about 50-50 over the years. But now that one of the tools I used in Photoshop quite a bit was the color range tool, and now it's in Lightroom. So I'm learning how to use that. And since I'm teaching out in the field, I need to to keep up with the latest, techniques in Lightroom. So some people don't want to touch Photoshop. So I'm slowly learning how to use the tools in Lightroom that I used to use in Photoshop. But I print out of Photoshop, by the way.
The second question, can you have different subjects in a portfolio?
Well, I'm not sure what the question means in particular, different subjects. Yeah, if it's on a place like Yosemite, I'm going to have different subjects in terms of dogwood and half dome and the Merced River, and so yes, if he's there, maybe he can clarify a bit, but that often is a personal choice. So sometimes a concept develops where you're just narrowly focused. Your theme becomes narrow, and then you're focused on one subject. I've worked with students that just were into waterfalls, lived near a lot of waterfalls, and that was the one subject. And so the challenge was to come up with varieties in a very similar subject. So it's a kind of a broad answer, but it's a broad question. So, subjects are really up to you. If there's a place you like, if it's birds, a certain type of bird, a certain type of tree, or just something broad like my title, Landscapes of the Spirit, that can be anywhere. I mean, to me, those are my most magical and mysterious photographs, not typical photographs, reflecting the way I make photographs. So the third question was about lessons from my camera motion images.
Movement picture technique.
Well, I can give some tips. I'm not sure. I mean, the lesson that I learned is that it's fun, and I started doing it when a long time ago, and it was just a nice break. I don't use a tripod. It's more like a sketching process. Instead of being deliberate on a tripod and kind of tied down and like I said, deliberate, and then with the motion images, I'll just get the camera in front of me and I'll just be moving up and down depending what the subject is, and holding the shutter down. And I get a lot of bad images and a few good ones. And it's something that I guess to me is underrated and not talked about as much as just the joy of exploring. To me, the being out there is the reason to photograph. Just making a photograph is kind of a secondary thing in a lot of ways. But so in terms of the impressionistic images, it frees me up from a tripod. It frees me up for getting that one right answer, getting very serious about this composition and getting it just right and clicking. Instead, I'm not sloppy when I make my impressionistic images, but it's a way I have fun taking pictures. In terms of a lesson about that, one of the things that, because it's kind of sketching, so people don't pay attention to image design. One thing I talk a lot about in my writings about is spaces between things. And even with moving the camera up and down, it helps to judge the spaces between things before you start moving the camera around up and down, for example.
I think that might tie into our last question from Ariel, who also says ICM and montage are fun. Her question is, does it help to think more metaphorically in your creative projects?
You're assuming I'm thinking. So no, I don't really, seriously, I don't really think. I just enjoy what I'm seeing, and I have technique, but I don't think about what it might represent. So I think the less my analytical brain is working when I make photographs, the better. And I tend, technically, I'm somewhat of a Luddite. I don't, I'm not overly technical. So I, in order to be creative, I need to keep things simple. So I'm not sure if that answers the question, but
I think it does. Think less, it gets in the way.
yeah, and technique is something that you have to get out of the way. You have to learn it. It's not like you don't have to have it. But the more you internalize your technique, the less is in between you and your subject, whether it's people or nature.
Thank
End
you.
of end of sermon.
End of sermon. This is going to be recorded. This has been recorded. This will be shared. Anybody who had to leave, we've had a pretty full audience the whole time. So thank you everyone for sticking around. There's some really wonderful feedback in the chat.
Yeah, please save the chat for me.
We save the chat.
Yeah.
For anyone who has not purchased the book yet, it is available on our website, rockynook.com. I'm going to link to that one more time. And it is also available anywhere fine books are sold. You can buy it at your local indie store, order it. And you can buy it from Amazon, but really anywhere you buy it, it supports the author. We really would love reviews. This really helps more book sales and allows William to keep doing what he's doing. So
good sales pitch. I like that. So, and the ebook is available to download right now, either Amazon or also on Rocky Nook's site. If I had my preference, I suggest going to Rocky Nook because that actually helps me. So not only just supporting Rocky Nook, but my cut of the sales is much better with Rocky Nook. Let's put it that way.
Straight from the author's mouth. You heard it here. Thank you so much and take care.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.